This is our country. It's your future, and we're building it together. We're catalyzing a series of nation-building projects in energy, in trade, critical minerals, transport, data, and beyond. These projects will make Canada stronger, more resilient, and more independent. They'll create good jobs and grow our economy, providing the resources that we need to take care of ourselves and take care of each other. And to make sure that all Canadians can share in these benefits, we're creating the Canada Strong Fund, Canada's first sovereign wealth fund. The Canada Strong Fund will invest alongside the private sector in nation-building projects to create wealth for Canadians today and our kids tomorrow. And if you have a bit of extra money, we'll make it easy for you to invest in the fund to help build Canada Strong for all. Canadians are choosing to buy Canadian, to explore Canadian, and build Canadian, because it's our country, and we're building our future together.
Canada is standing at a turning point, and this time it could lead to something huge. What Mark Carney just revealed could quietly change how Canada grows richer over time. But the most powerful part of this plan is something almost no one has noticed yet. The announcement is the Canada Strong Fund, Canada's first national sovereign wealth fund, seeded with $25 billion in initial government investment, designed to take equity positions in major national infrastructure projects, and eventually open to ordinary Canadian investors who want a direct stake in the nation-building projects their government is backing. This is not a spending announcement. It is not a subsidy program. It is not a government loan extended to a private developer in exchange for nothing. It is a structural mechanism designed to ensure that when Canada's natural wealth generates financial returns through pipelines, LNG terminals, critical mineral mines, and energy export infrastructure, a portion of those returns flows into a national account that compounds over time and eventually funds public services, offsets taxation, and provides the kind of economic buffer that protects ordinary Canadians from the commodity cycles and external trade pressures that have historically left this country exposed. The architecture Carney has unveiled contains two distinct but complementary tools. The first is not new, but most people have never properly understood it. The Canada Infrastructure Bank, the CIB, already exists and already operates. It functions as a lender, using federal capital to offer loans and equity instruments that crowd in private and institutional investment for large-scale infrastructure projects. The logic is straightforward. A pipeline or LNG terminal or critical mineral processing facility may have a sound business case over 20 years, but carry construction phase risk that no single private investor is willing to absorb entirely. The CIB steps in, reduces that front-end risk, and unlocks the private capital that would otherwise sit on the sidelines waiting for someone else to take the first risk. It is not handing out cash. It is using a federal balance sheet advantage to make investable what the private market alone finds too uncertain. The Canada Strong Fund adds the equity layer that the CIB lacks. Where the CIB lends, the Canada Strong Fund owns. When the pipeline gets built and starts generating transportation revenue at a fixed fee per barrel, those revenues flow proportionally to whoever holds equity. If the Canada Strong Fund holds a 10% stake, 10% of that revenue stream flows into the fund. The fund accumulates. The capital compounds. Over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the fund grows into something that begins to resemble what Norway built. A national financial asset that generates returns independent of the annual tax cycle, providing a sovereign economic cushion that no amount of quarterly budget management can replicate. The management structure is where the credibility of the entire concept rests. Carney and Finance Minister Champagne have been explicit. The fund will operate at arm's length from politicians, managed by professional investment managers, operating under a fiduciary mandate rather than a political one. The model they are invoking is the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, an entity that has built one of the world's most respected institutional investment track records, precisely because its managers answer to a return obligation, not a partisan agenda. If the Canada Strong Fund is structured with the same operational independence, it works. If it becomes a tool for rewarding political allies or funding projects based on riding calculations rather than investment returns, it fails and deserves to fail. The architecture requires discipline. The discipline requires insulation from the political pressures that destroyed Alberta's Heritage Fund. Alberta's story is the cautionary tale embedded in every honest discussion of what Canada is attempting to build. Peter Lougheed established the Heritage Fund during the oil boom of the 1970s, with exactly the generational logic that Norway applied. The fund was designed to capture a portion of Alberta's resource royalties and compound them into permanent provincial wealth. What happened instead is documented in the fund's current balance, a fraction of what it should have become, because successive governments treated it as a rainy day account rather than a compound growth machine, withdrawing principal and returns rather than letting them accumulate. If Alberta had maintained Lougheed's original discipline, the province would be sitting on something approaching $1 trillion today. That $1 trillion does not exist because the discipline did not survive the political cycles. Carney's Canada Strong Fund is an attempt to learn that lesson at the national level and institutionalize the insulation that Alberta's politicians never managed to maintain. The competitive pressure that gives this announcement its urgency is not domestic, it is continental. The United States Energy Department is expected to offer up to $44 billion in credit support for the Alaska LNG project, federal financial tools deployed to de-risk a major American LNG development and ensure U.S. producers capture Asian market share as global LNG demand surges in the wake of the Strait of Hormuz disruption. That is Washington using its national balance sheet as a competitive weapon in the race for Pacific energy markets. Canada is in that same race. Trans Mountain is running near full capacity to the Pacific coast. LNG Canada is operational in Kitimat. The Enbridge Sunrise expansion adds 300 million cubic feet of gas per day. But building the next phase of that export infrastructure, the second Pacific pipeline, the expanded LNG terminals, the critical mineral processing facilities requires capital at a scale and on a timeline that the private market alone will not consistently provide without public backing that reduces the front-end risk. Canada Strong is how Carney intends to ensure Canada is not outcompeted by American credit support, while it is simultaneously navigating the most challenging bilateral trade relationship in modern history. Pierre Poilievre's critique arrived precisely on cue. He called it $25 billion on a national credit card, padding a liberal slush fund. He asked his framing question: if a project has a business case, why does the government need to fund it? It sounds like a clean argument. It works only if you ignore that the most conservative institutional investors in the world, pension funds managing retirement savings for millions, operate on exactly this equity co-investment model. It works only if you pretend that the United States is not deploying $44 billion in federal credit support to compete directly with Canada in the same export markets. It works only if you confuse an equity stake in a revenue-generating infrastructure asset with a government expenditure that produces no return. Poilievre is deliberately conflating investment with debt. The distinction matters because pension funds exist and generate returns. Their members depend on precisely because someone understood the difference. The returns that a properly structured Canada Strong Fund would generate over 20 years would offset public expenditure in exactly the way Norway's fund has done, covering a portion of healthcare costs, educational funding, and social services through investment income rather than income tax. The connection to the grocery bill is real. It is delayed by a decade or two, which is why it is politically easy to dismiss. But Norway's politicians in the 1990s faced the same dismissal and had the discipline to ignore it. That fund now owns a piece of virtually every major company on Earth. A country of 5 million people became a permanent shareholder in global capitalism because its leaders made one structurally sound decision at the right moment. Canada is at that moment. The resources are in the ground. The infrastructure is being built. The Asian demand is acute and growing. The $25 billion seed is committed. The architecture exists. The Norway precedent is proven. What happens next depends entirely on whether Canada has the institutional discipline to protect the Canada Strong Fund from the political pressures that have historically prevented this country from keeping the returns from its own wealth